My name is Tyler, and I'm 23 now, but what I'm about to tell you happened when I was 16. My dad remarried when I was 14, 2 years after my mom died in a car accident. At first, Linda seemed like exactly what our broken family needed. She was warm, caring, and genuinely seemed to love my dad and want to help raise me and my younger sister Emma, who was 12 at the time. But people can hide who they really are for a long time, especially when they're determined to get what they want. The first sign something was wrong came about 8 months after the wedding. I woke up one night around 2 a.m. because I heard whispering outside my bedroom door. At first, I thought it was my dad talking to Emma. Maybe she'd had a nightmare. But as I listened closer, I realized it was Linda's voice, and she was talking to someone on the phone. "No, they still don't suspect anything," she was saying in this cold, calculated tone I'd never heard from her before. "The boy is starting to trust me, and the girl adores me. Richard is completely wrapped around my finger. A few more months and I'll have everything I need." I pressed my ear to the door, my heart racing. She continued, "The life insurance payout from his first wife was substantial, and now that I'm legally his spouse, I have access to everything. The kids are just obstacles I need to manage." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This woman who'd been making us breakfast every morning and helping Emma with homework was talking about us like we were problems to be solved. But the worst part was what she said next. "Don't worry about them causing trouble. I have ways of keeping children quiet and compliant. I learned from the best." The line went dead, and I heard her footsteps moving away from my door. I sat there in my bed shaking, trying to process what I just heard. Part of me wanted to believe I'd misunderstood or that I was having some kind of nightmare. But deep down, I knew what I'd heard was real. The next morning, Linda was back to her normal self, making pancakes, asking about our school day, being the perfect stepmother. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was all an act. I tried to tell my dad what I'd heard, but he just laughed it off. "Tyler, you probably just caught part of a conversation out of context," he said, putting his arm around Linda. "Linda loves you kids. She's been nothing but wonderful to our family." Linda smiled at me, but there was something cold in her eyes. "I understand you might have concerns, Tyler. It's natural for teenagers to feel protective of their family. But I hope you know that I only want what's best for you and Emma." The way she said it made my skin crawl. It sounded like a threat disguised as reassurance. That night, things escalated dramatically. I was lying in bed around midnight when I heard my door slowly creak open. I pretended to be asleep, but through barely open eyes, I could see a figure standing in my doorway. It was Linda, just standing there, watching me sleep. She stood there for what felt like hours, not moving, just watching. Occasionally, she'd whisper things I could barely make out, comments about how children need to learn their place, and how respect is earned through fear. This became a nightly routine. Linda would stand in my doorway for hours, sometimes whispering threats, sometimes just watching in complete silence. She'd describe in detail what would happen if I ever caused problems for her marriage to my dad. She talked about foster care, about how easy it would be to convince my dad that I was becoming troubled and needed to be sent away. "Your father loves me more than he could ever love a reminder of his dead wife," she'd whisper. "All I have to do is tell him you've been acting aggressively toward me, and he'll believe me. Adults always believe other adults over children." But Emma was getting the worst of it. Linda had figured out that my little sister was terrified of being alone in the dark after our mom died. So Linda would sneak into Emma's room and hide in her closet or under her bed, making small noises just loud enough to keep Emma awake and frightened. Emma started having severe anxiety attacks and couldn't sleep through the night. When she tried to tell Dad about the monsters in her room, Linda would comfort her publicly while my dad was watching, but I could see the satisfaction in Linda's eyes. She was systematically breaking my sister's sense of security. The psychological warfare extended to our dad as well. Linda would wake him up at all hours with fake emergencies, claiming she heard someone trying to break in, or that one of us kids had been sleepwalking and she was worried about our safety. She'd rearrange things in the house and then accuse my dad of being forgetful or stressed, slowly making him question his own memory and judgment. She was isolating him from his friends and family, convincing him that people were trying to turn him against her. She'd intercept phone calls and emails, and when relatives tried to visit, she'd create drama or emergencies that required my dad's immediate attention. The worst night was about 3 months into this psychological torture campaign. I woke up to find Linda standing over my bed with a kitchen knife in her hand. She wasn't threatening me with it, she was just holding it, running her finger along the blade. "You know, Tyler," she whispered, "accidents happen to children all the time. Especially children who don't know when to keep their mouths shut. Your father would be devastated if something happened to you, but he'd get over it eventually. People always do." She leaned closer, and I could smell her perfume mixed with something else, something that made my stomach turn. "But Emma is so fragile. So easily frightened. It would be terrible if her fear became so overwhelming that she hurt herself. These things happen with traumatized children." I realized in that moment that Linda wasn't just psychologically abusing us, she was planning something much worse. She was systematically breaking down our mental health and isolating our dad so that when something tragic happened to us, there would be an explanation. Emma's anxiety attacks could be explained as depression or self-harm. My attempts to warn people about Linda could be dismissed as teenage rebellion or psychological problems. The next day, I made a decision that probably saved our lives. Instead of trying to convince my dad, who was clearly being manipulated, I went to my school counselor, Mrs. Rodriguez. I told her everything: the nighttime surveillance, the threats, the psychological torture of Emma, and Linda's comments about accidents and making us disappear. Mrs. Rodriguez took detailed notes and immediately contacted Child Protective Services. Within 48 hours, there was an investigation underway. They set up hidden cameras in our house and arranged for Emma and me to stay with our Aunt Sarah for a few days while they gathered evidence. The cameras caught everything: Linda's nighttime visits to our rooms, her whispered threats, her fake emergency calls to wake up our dad. They also discovered that Linda had been researching methods of making deaths appear accidental, including how to stage falls downstairs and medication overdoses. Most chilling of all, they found a journal hidden in Linda's dresser where she'd been documenting her progress with each family member. She'd written detailed plans for how to eliminate Emma and me while maintaining her position as the grieving stepmother who'd inherit everything. The entry that still haunts me read: "The boy is becoming more suspicious and may need to be dealt with soon. A tragic accident during one of his nighttime wanderings could be arranged. The girl's mental state is deteriorating perfectly. Her suicide will be believable within the month. Richard is completely dependent on me now and will never question my version of events." Linda was arrested and charged with multiple counts of child endangerment, psychological abuse, and conspiracy to commit murder. During the investigation, they discovered this wasn't her first time. She'd been married twice before, and both husbands had died in suspicious circumstances after their children from previous marriages had accidents or ran away. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison, but the damage to our family was already done. My dad had to go through intensive therapy to deal with the guilt and manipulation he'd endured. Emma struggled with anxiety and trust issues for years. And I still have trouble sleeping through the night, even though I know Linda is behind bars. The most terrifying part wasn't the threats or even the physical intimidation. It was how perfectly she could switch between being the loving stepmother during the day and the predator at night. She'd mastered the art of psychological manipulation so completely that she almost succeeded in destroying our family without anyone outside our house ever suspecting. Child Protective Services told us that cases like ours are more common than people realize. There are predators who specifically target single parents with children and assets, using marriage as a way to access both financial resources and vulnerable victims. They're experts at appearing normal while systematically destroying their victims' sense of reality and safety. We learned that Linda had been watching our family for months before she ever, coincidentally, met my dad at the grocery store. She'd researched our mom's death, our dad's insurance settlements, and our family's routines. Her entire relationship with my dad was calculated and planned. The experience taught me that evil doesn't always look like what we expect. Linda wasn't some obvious monster, she was a skilled manipulator who understood exactly how to exploit grief, loneliness, and trust. She knew that children's testimonies are often dismissed, especially when they're accusing a popular adult figure. If Mrs. Rodriguez hadn't taken me seriously, if CPS hadn't acted quickly, Emma and I would likely be dead right now. Linda's plan was methodical and probably would have worked. My dad would have been left alone with a woman who'd systematically murdered his children, and he never would have known the truth. The justice system worked in our case, but I know there are other families out there living with similar predators. The warning signs are subtle isolation from support systems, gaslighting, nighttime psychological warfare, and that feeling that someone's public persona doesn't match their private behavior. Emma is 20 now and doing well in college. She's majoring in social work because she wants to help other children who've been through similar experiences. My dad eventually remarried a wonderful woman named Carol who Emma and I both genuinely love and trust. But it took years of therapy for all of us to learn how to trust again. I'm sharing this story because I want people to understand that psychological abuse can be just as devastating as physical violence. Linda never hit us, but she came close to completely destroying our family through calculated emotional torture. Children's voices need to be heard and believed, especially when they're trying to warn adults about danger. The stepmother who terrorized us is still in prison, but I know there are others like her out there. They're patient, skilled, and absolutely ruthless in pursuing their goals. If something feels wrong in your family situation, trust that instinct. Don't let anyone convince you that you're imagining things or being overly sensitive. The person who's supposed to protect you should never be the one you're afraid of in the dark. What's your experience with trusting your instincts about people? Have you ever had that gut feeling that someone wasn't who they pretended to be? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. My name is Marcus, and I'm 28 now, but I need to tell you about what happened when I was 13. This was back in 2009, in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Bakersfield, California. My dad had remarried about a year earlier to a woman named Patricia, and at first, we thought she was just really interested in keeping us safe and teaching us to be aware of our surroundings. What we didn't realize was that Patricia was training us to be her surveillance network, and if we ever got caught watching the neighbors, we were supposed to act like we had developed mental disabilities. It started innocently enough. Patricia would give my 11-year-old sister Mia and me these observation exercises that she said would help us become more mature and responsible. She'd position us at different windows in our house on Elm Drive and have us take notes on what the neighbors were doing. Notice everything, she'd tell us. What time do they leave for work? Who visits them? What do they throw away? Are they following their normal routines? She made it sound like a fun game, like we were junior detectives. She even bought us little notebooks and binoculars, telling our dad that she was helping us develop critical thinking skills and attention to detail. Our dad, Robert, thought it was wonderful that Patricia was so involved in our education. He worked long hours as a shift supervisor at a local manufacturing plant, so he was grateful that Patricia was spending so much time with us. He had no idea what she was really teaching us to do. The house directly across from us belonged to the Hendersons, an older couple, probably in their 70s. Patricia was particularly interested in their daily routines. She'd have us track when they got their mail, when they went to the grocery store, when their adult children visited. Mr. Henderson takes his blood pressure medication at 8 a.m. and 8 p.m., Patricia would say, reviewing our notes. Mrs. Henderson goes to the bank every Tuesday at 2 p.m. Their daughter visits every other Sunday and always brings groceries. At the time, I thought Patricia was just being a concerned neighbor who wanted to make sure the elderly couple was okay. But there were other details she'd have us record that seemed strange, like what kind of car they drove, whether they had a security system, and where they kept their spare key. The family to our left, the Garcias, had 3 young children, and Patricia was obsessed with their schedules. She'd have us note when the parents left for work, when the kids got dropped off at daycare, and when the house was empty. "Notice how the mother always leaves her purse on the kitchen counter," Patricia would say, pointing through their window. "See how the father never locks the back door when he's mowing the lawn?" These are important observations. But the most disturbing part was what Patricia taught us to do if we ever got caught watching people. She'd spend hours coaching us on how to act slow or confused if anyone questioned what we were doing. "If someone asks why you're looking in their windows, you start rocking back and forth," she'd instruct. "Look down at your feet and speak in a very quiet voice. Tell them you're sorry and that you didn't mean to do anything wrong. Act like you don't really understand what they're upset about." She'd make us practice these performances until we could do them convincingly. She taught us to make repetitive hand movements, to avoid eye contact, and to speak in broken sentences that made us sound developmentally delayed. "People feel sorry for special needs children," she'd explain. "They won't call the police on a kid who seems disabled. They'll just feel bad and tell you to go home. This is your protection if anyone ever catches you watching." What made this even more twisted was that Patricia worked as a nurse's aide at a local care facility, so she had professional knowledge about developmental disabilities. She knew exactly how to coach us to mimic the behaviors she'd observed in her patients. After about 6 months of this training, Patricia started sending us on what she called field missions. She'd have us walk around the neighborhood with our notebooks, observing houses and taking notes on security measures, schedules, and valuable items we could see through windows. "Remember," she'd say before we left, "if anyone stops you, you're just 2 kids who got confused and lost. You're not quite right in the head, and you're sorry for bothering anyone." The mission that changed everything happened on a Tuesday afternoon in November. Patricia had sent us to observe a house 3 streets over where a single mother lived with her 2 young children. The woman worked from home as a freelance graphic designer, and Patricia wanted detailed notes on her daily routine. Mia and I were positioned behind some bushes in the backyard, watching through the woman's home office window, when suddenly someone grabbed my shoulder. I spun around to see a man in his 40s wearing a security company uniform. "What are you kids doing back here?" he demanded. "This is private property." Without thinking, I immediately went into the performance Patricia had trained us for. I started rocking back and forth, avoiding eye contact, and speaking in the slow, broken sentences she'd taught me. Sorry, we got lost," I mumbled, making my voice sound confused and childlike. "We didn't mean to, we just wanted to." Mia joined in, making repetitive hand movements and speaking in the high-pitched voice Patricia had coached her to use. "We're sorry, mister. We didn't know we weren't supposed to be here." But this security guard was smarter than Patricia had anticipated. His name was David Chen, and he'd been working private security for over 15 years. He dealt with actual developmentally disabled individuals, and something about our performance felt off to him. "What are those notebooks for?" he asked, pointing to the detailed surveillance notes we'd been taking. I panicked and tried to hide the notebook, but he'd already seen the pages of carefully recorded observations about the woman's work schedule, her children's routines, and notes about her home's security. "These are very detailed notes for kids who claim to be confused and lost," Officer Chen said. "Why don't you tell me what's really going on here?" That's when everything fell apart. Under pressure, and faced with an adult who clearly didn't believe our act, I broke down and told him the truth. I explained about Patricia's observation exercises, the surveillance missions, and how she trained us to act disabled if we got caught. Officer Chen immediately called the police and contacted Child Protective Services. Within hours, our house was being searched, and investigators were discovering the extent of Patricia's operation. What they found was horrifying. Patricia had been using Mia and me to case houses throughout the neighborhood for over 6 months. She had detailed files on dozens of families, including their schedules, security measures, valuable items, and vulnerabilities. The most disturbing discovery was in Patricia's bedroom closet, a box containing keys, photographs, and small items that had clearly been stolen from the houses we'd been watching. She'd been using our surveillance to plan break-ins, entering homes when she knew the families would be away. But it was worse than simple burglary. The investigation revealed that Patricia was part of a larger identity theft ring. She'd been stealing mail, documents, and personal information from the families we'd been watching. She'd used our detailed notes about people's routines to know when it was safe to access their mailboxes and trash. The Hendersons, the elderly couple we'd been watching most closely, had been victims of extensive identity fraud. Patricia had used their personal information to open credit accounts and had been slowly draining their savings. Mrs. Henderson's weekly bank visits that we'd been tracking were actually desperate attempts to figure out why money was disappearing from their accounts. The Garcia family had been victims of a break-in 3 months earlier. Patricia had used our surveillance notes to know exactly when their house would be empty and what valuables were inside. She'd stolen jewelry, electronics, and important documents while the family was at work and daycare. During the investigation, we learned that Patricia had been planning something much more serious. She'd been researching the schedules of several families with young children, and investigators found evidence that she was planning kidnappings. Our detailed notes about children's routines and their parents' work schedules were going to be used to identify targets. The most chilling discovery was a conversation Patricia had recorded with someone she called her partner. In it, she bragged about how easy it was to use children as surveillance tools because nobody suspects kids, especially kids who seem a little slow. She'd chosen to target my dad specifically because he was a single parent who worked long hours and would be grateful for help with childcare. She'd researched our family for months before engineering their chance meeting at a coffee shop near his workplace. Patricia was arrested and charged with multiple counts of identity theft, burglary, child endangerment, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping. Her partner turned out to be her ex-husband, and together they'd been running this operation in 3 different states over the past 5 years. The trial revealed that Patricia had used children in her previous relationships as surveillance tools as well. She'd married single fathers, trained their children to spy on neighbors, and used the information to commit crimes. If the children ever got caught, they were coached to act disabled so that any testimony they gave would be dismissed as unreliable. During the investigation, a child psychologist explained to us how Patricia had been systematically abusing us through what's called instrumental exploitation. She trained us to be accomplices in criminal activity while making us believe we were playing games or learning valuable skills. The fake disability training was particularly disturbing because it taught us to deceive adults who might have been trying to help us. If a teacher, neighbor, or police officer had tried to intervene, we would have automatically performed the Disability Act, making it impossible for them to understand what was really happening. Patricia was sentenced to 18 years in prison, but the damage to our family and neighborhood was extensive. 7 families had been victims of identity theft, 3 houses had been burglarized, and dozens of people had to deal with the violation of knowing their every move had been watched and recorded. The psychological impact on Mia and me was severe. We'd been turned into instruments of criminal activity against our own neighbors, people who had never done anything wrong to us. We'd helped someone steal from an elderly couple who'd always been kind to us, and we'd contributed to the trauma of families with young children. The hardest part was learning to trust our own judgment again. Patricia had spent months training us to observe and report on suspicious behavior, but what she'd really been doing was teaching us to violate other people's privacy and safety. We had to relearn what normal, respectful behavior looked like. Our dad was devastated when he learned what had been happening. He'd been so grateful for Patricia's help with us that he never questioned her methods or motives. He blamed himself for not recognizing the signs of abuse, even though Patricia had been an expert manipulator. We moved to a different neighborhood after the trial, but it took years of therapy for all of us to recover. Mia developed severe anxiety about being watched, and I struggled with guilt over the role I'd played in hurting innocent people. The case led to changes in how local law enforcement and social services handle situations involving children with disabilities. There's now better training for recognizing when children might be coached to fake disabilities, and there are protocols for getting appropriate evaluations in suspicious situations. What I want people to understand is that criminals can use children as weapons without the children even realizing it. Patricia had turned us into her surveillance network by making it seem like education and games. We thought we were learning valuable skills, but we were actually being trained to violate our neighbors' safety and privacy. The fake disability training was designed to make us invisible to the adults who might have been able to help us. By teaching us to act disabled, Patricia ensured that even if we were caught, our testimony would be dismissed as unreliable or confused. Parents need to be aware of adults who show unusual interest in having children observe or report on neighbors. What seems like teaching kids to be aware of their surroundings could actually be training them to be surveillance tools for criminal activity. If an adult is coaching children to act disabled or confused when questioned by authority figures, that's a major red flag. Legitimate caregivers don't teach children to deceive police officers, teachers, or social workers. Mia is 25 now and works as a victim advocate for families affected by identity theft. She's used her experience to help other children who've been exploited by adults they trusted. Our relationship with our neighborhood has been rebuilt over the years, but it required a lot of work to regain people's trust. Our dad eventually remarried a wonderful woman named Jennifer who helped us understand what healthy family relationships look like. She's never asked us to spy on neighbors or lie to authority figures. She's shown us that real love doesn't require children to participate in illegal activities. The stepmother who turned us into criminals is still in prison, but I know there are other predators using similar tactics. They target single parents who need help with childcare, and they exploit children's natural desire to please adults and feel important. If something feels wrong about how an adult is asking you to observe or interact with neighbors, trust that instinct. Children should never be asked to spy on other people or to lie to authority figures about their activities. Real caregivers protect children from criminal activity, they don't train them to participate in it. The person who's supposed to keep you safe should never turn you into a weapon against others. Have you ever noticed unusual behavior from neighbors or adults that made you uncomfortable? What would you do if you suspected a child was being used in ways they didn't understand? Share your thoughts in the comments below. My name is Jennifer, and I'm 26 now, but I need to tell you about what we discovered in our stepmother's attic laboratory in 2018. This happened in Ridgeway, Ohio, in a house that looked completely normal from the outside but was hiding something that still gives me nightmares. My dad married Catherine when I was 21 and my younger brother Alex was 19. We were both in college, so we only came home for holidays and summer breaks. Catherine seemed like the perfect match for our dad. She was intelligent, well-educated, and claimed to be a retired pharmaceutical researcher who'd made good investments and could afford not to work. What we didn't know was that Catherine hadn't retired from pharmaceutical research. She'd been fired from 3 different companies for conducting unauthorized human trials and had lost her license to practice. But she'd never stopped her research, she just moved it to a more private location. The first sign something was wrong came during Christmas break in 2017. I noticed that Catherine had installed a new security system that included cameras throughout the house, and she'd added multiple locks to the attic door. When I asked about it, she said she was storing valuable research materials from her previous career and needed to protect them from theft. I have decades of proprietary research data up there, she explained. Industrial espionage is a real concern in the pharmaceutical industry. I can't risk competitors getting access to my work. It seemed reasonable at the time. Catherine was clearly intelligent and successful, so protecting valuable intellectual property made sense. But there were other things that bothered me, like the fact that she'd installed a separate electrical system for the attic, complete with its own breaker box and meter. She'd also had industrial-grade ventilation installed, which seemed excessive for document storage. When I asked about it, she said some of the older research materials contained chemicals that could be dangerous if they weren't properly ventilated. The real red flag was Catherine's behavior around food and drinks. She was obsessed with controlling what Alex and I ate when we were home. She'd prepare special meals for us, insisting that we needed nutritional support, because college students don't eat properly. "I've formulated these supplements specifically for your age group," she'd say, handing us vitamins and protein drinks. "Your father doesn't need them, his metabolism is different. But you two need extra nutritional support for optimal brain function." She'd get genuinely upset if we refused to take her supplements, or if we ate food that she hadn't prepared. She'd lecture us about the importance of controlled nutrition, and how random food choices could interfere with our developmental optimization. Looking back, I realized she was testing substances on us, but at the time, it just seemed like she was being health conscious in an annoying way. Alex and I would joke about our health nut stepmother who was obsessed with organic food and supplements. But then Alex started having weird health issues. During spring break 2018, he began experiencing severe headaches, nausea, and periods of confusion. He'd forget conversations we'd had or repeat the same story multiple times. His hands would shake, and he'd have trouble concentrating on simple tasks. When we took him to the campus health center, they ran blood tests but couldn't find anything wrong. They suggested it might be stress-related or possibly a viral infection. But Catherine was very interested in his symptoms, asking detailed questions about when they occurred and how severe they were. "I might be able to help," she offered. "I have experience with neurological symptoms from my research days. Let me prepare some specialized supplements that might help with his brain chemistry." She started giving Alex different vitamins and drinks, claiming they were designed to help with his specific symptoms. But instead of getting better, Alex got worse. He started having memory problems so severe that he'd forget where he was or what he was doing. That's when I decided to investigate what was really going on in Catherine's attic laboratory. The opportunity came in June 2018, when Catherine and my dad went to a medical conference in Chicago for 3 days. She'd made a big deal about how she was attending to network with former colleagues and stay current with industry developments. What she didn't know was that Alex had been having lucid moments where he remembered things clearly, and during one of those moments he'd overheard her talking to someone on the phone about adjusting dosages and monitoring cognitive effects. The attic door had 5 different locks, but Alex had been studying engineering and knew how to pick locks. It took us 2 hours, but we finally got the door open and climbed the stairs to Catherine's secret laboratory. What we found was a fully equipped pharmaceutical research facility. There were industrial-grade centrifuges, chemical analysis equipment, a fume hood, and refrigeration units containing hundreds of vials of different substances. The walls were lined with charts tracking chemical formulas, dosage calculations, and what appeared to be test results. But the most horrifying discovery was a filing cabinet containing detailed medical records not just for Alex and me, but for dozens of other people. Catherine had been conducting unauthorized human trials for years, using family members and acquaintances as test subjects without their knowledge or consent. Alex's file was 3 inches thick, containing daily notes about his symptoms, blood pressure readings, and photographs documenting physical changes. Catherine had been systematically poisoning him with experimental neurological drugs and recording the results. My file was smaller but equally disturbing. Catherine had been giving me experimental hormone treatments disguised as vitamins, and she'd been tracking my menstrual cycles, mood changes, and weight fluctuations. She'd been testing fertility drugs on me without my knowledge. But the most chilling discovery was a file labeled Control Group that contained information about our dad. Catherine had been giving him experimental cardiac medications disguised as blood pressure pills. She'd been monitoring his heart rate, blood pressure, and cholesterol levels as part of a study on aging and cardiovascular health. The research wasn't random. Catherine had been conducting organized clinical trials on 3 different drug categories. She was testing neurological drugs on young adults, hormonal treatments on college-aged women, and cardiac medications on middle-aged men. She'd been using our family as her personal laboratory for illegal pharmaceutical research. We found correspondence with overseas pharmaceutical companies that were paying Catherine for her research data. She'd been selling the results of her illegal human trials to companies that couldn't get approval for testing in regulated environments. The most disturbing file was labeled Adverse Events. and contained records of people who'd had severe reactions to Catherine's experimental drugs. There were hospital records, death certificates, and insurance claims for people who'd suffered organ damage, brain injuries, and other serious health problems. One section documented a man named Richard Morrison who'd been Catherine's boyfriend before she married our dad. Catherine had been testing experimental blood thinners on him, and he'd suffered a massive stroke that left him permanently disabled. The file contained his medical records and notes about how Catherine had terminated the relationship to avoid legal complications. We realized that Catherine had been systematically poisoning people for years, using romantic relationships and family connections to access victims. She'd target people who trusted her, gradually introduce experimental substances into their food and drinks, and monitor the results while maintaining the facade of a caring partner or family member. The laboratory contained evidence of at least 12 different victims over the past 8 years. Catherine would establish relationships with people, conduct her experiments, and then either disappear from their lives or, in some cases, stay to monitor long-term effects. What made this even more horrifying was that Catherine had been documenting everything with scientific precision. She had video recordings of Alex during his confused episodes, detailed photographs of physical changes in test subjects, and even audio recordings of people describing their symptoms. She'd been treating human beings like laboratory animals, and she'd been getting paid for it by pharmaceutical companies that wanted access to illegal research data. We immediately called the police, but Catherine had covered her tracks well. All of her victims had been experiencing what appeared to be natural health problems, stress-related symptoms in college students, hormonal changes in young women, and age-related issues in older men. The investigation revealed that Catherine had been using legitimate medical knowledge to disguise her illegal activities. She'd choose experimental drugs that would cause symptoms that could be explained as common health issues, making it nearly impossible for victims to realize they were being poisoned. When confronted with the evidence, Catherine claimed she was conducting beneficial research that would help develop new medications. She insisted that her test subjects had been improved by her treatments and that any side effects were temporary and reversible. But the medical experts who reviewed her research found serious ethical violations and dangerous methodologies. Catherine had been using untested drug combinations, ignoring safety protocols, and conducting research without proper oversight or emergency medical support. The toxicology reports on Alex's blood revealed dangerous levels of experimental nootropics, drugs designed to enhance cognitive function but that had caused severe neurological damage. The doctors said that if Catherine had continued her experiments for another few months, Alex could have suffered permanent brain damage or death. Catherine was arrested and charged with multiple counts of aggravated assault, reckless endangerment, practicing medicine without a license, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The investigation expanded to include victims in 3 different states where Catherine had lived and worked. The pharmaceutical companies that had been purchasing Catherine's research data faced massive lawsuits and regulatory investigations. Several executives were charged with knowingly purchasing the results of illegal human trials, and the companies paid millions in settlements to victims. Alex required 6 months of medical treatment to recover from the neurological damage Catherine had caused. He had to take a leave of absence from college and undergo extensive therapy to regain his cognitive function. The doctors said he was lucky to be alive and that Catherine's experiments had come close to causing irreversible brain damage. The investigation revealed that Catherine had been targeting families with young adults because that demographic was valuable to pharmaceutical companies researching cognitive enhancement drugs. She'd specifically chosen our dad because he had college-age children who would be home periodically but wouldn't be around long enough to notice gradual changes in their health. She'd also been attracted to our dad's stable income and health insurance, which gave her access to legitimate medical care for her test subjects if something went wrong. She'd been using our family's medical coverage to monitor the effects of her illegal experiments. The most disturbing aspect of Catherine's operation was how she'd been planning to expand it. Investigators found evidence that she'd been researching our friends and extended family members, planning to recruit new test subjects through social connections. She'd been documenting our social media posts, tracking our relationships, and identifying potential victims who might trust her because of their connection to our family. She'd been planning to use family gatherings and social events as opportunities to recruit new test subjects. Catherine was sentenced to 25 years in prison, but the damage to our family and the other victims was extensive. Several people suffered permanent health problems from her experiments, and at least 3 deaths were potentially linked to her illegal research. The experience taught us that predators can use legitimate expertise to disguise criminal activity. Catherine's pharmaceutical background gave her the knowledge and credibility to conduct illegal human trials while making them appear to be normal health concerns. She'd exploited the trust that comes with family relationships and used our love for our dad to gain access to victims. We trusted her because she seemed educated and caring, never suspecting that she was systematically poisoning us for profit. The case led to new regulations about pharmaceutical research oversight and stricter penalties for conducting unauthorized human trials. There are now better systems for tracking researchers who've lost their licenses and preventing them from continuing illegal activities. What I want people to understand is that criminals can use professional expertise to harm people in ways that are difficult to detect. Catherine had turned our home into a secret laboratory and our family into unwilling test subjects, all while maintaining the facade of a loving stepmother. If someone in your life is unusually interested in controlling what you eat or drink, or if they're pushing supplements or medications that seem unnecessary, that could be a red flag. Legitimate healthcare providers don't conduct secret experiments on family members. Alex is 25 now and has recovered most of his cognitive function, though he still deals with occasional memory issues from Catherine's experiments. He's studying biochemistry and wants to work in pharmaceutical safety to prevent other people from experiencing what we went through. Our dad had to undergo extensive medical treatment to recover from the cardiac medications Catherine had been giving him. He's healthy now, but he struggles with guilt over bringing someone into our family who used us as laboratory animals. The stepmother who turned our home into a secret laboratory is still in prison, but I know there are other predators with professional expertise who might be using their knowledge to harm people. Trust your instincts if something feels wrong about how someone is trying to control your health or medical care. The person who's supposed to protect your health should never turn you into a test subject. Have you ever felt uncomfortable about someone's unusual interest in your health or diet? What would you do if you suspected someone was tampering with food or medications? Share your thoughts in the comments below. My name is David, and I'm 35 now. What I'm about to tell you connects to everything you've heard before, because the woman who terrorized my family wasn't just a random predator, she was part of a network that had been systematically targeting single fathers and their children across multiple states. This happened in 2019 in Greenwood, North Carolina. My dad, William, was a 52-year-old widower who worked as a quality control supervisor at a textile manufacturing plant. My sister Rachel was 16, and I was 24, just finishing my master's degree in criminal justice. Our mom had died in a workplace accident 3 years earlier, and Dad was still struggling with depression and loneliness. The woman who would become our stepmother started targeting our family 6 months before she ever spoke to my dad. Her name was Victoria, and she was a master manipulator who had been using stalking and intimidation tactics to force men into marriages that gave her access to their assets and their children. It began with surveillance. Victoria would park her dark blue 2017 Honda Accord on different streets around our neighborhood, watching our house for hours. She documented Dad's work schedule, Rachel's school activities, and my college visits home. She learned our routines so thoroughly that she could predict where we'd be at any given time. But Victoria wasn't just watching us, she was actively sabotaging Dad's life to make him more vulnerable to her manipulation. She'd call his workplace anonymously, reporting fake safety violations that would get him in trouble with his supervisors. She'd cancel his appointments, intercept his mail, and even had his car vandalized to create stress and financial pressure. The psychological warfare escalated when Victoria began what she called proximity introduction. She'd show up at places where Dad went regularly: the grocery store, the gas station, his favorite restaurant, but she'd never approach him directly. Instead, she'd position herself where he'd notice her, creating a sense of familiarity without actual contact. She'd dress attractively and carry props that suggested she was successful and independent: expensive handbags, business documents, jewelry. She was creating an image of herself as the kind of woman who would be perfect for a lonely widower, while simultaneously making his life more difficult so he'd be desperate for companionship. The first direct contact came when Victoria, accidentally, rear-ended Dad's 2015 Ford F-150 in a parking lot. She was extremely apologetic, insisted on paying for the damage immediately, and suggested they go to coffee to discuss the details away from traffic. What Dad didn't know was that Victoria had been following him for weeks, waiting for the perfect opportunity to stage this accident. She'd researched his insurance, his vehicle, and even his preferred coffee shop. Nothing about their meeting was accidental. During their coffee, Victoria presented herself as recently divorced, financially stable, and looking for a meaningful relationship with a mature man. She claimed to be a freelance business consultant who could work from anywhere, making her available to support Dad and help with Rachel. But Victoria's background was completely fabricated. She wasn't divorced, she'd never been married. She wasn't a business consultant, she was unemployed and living off money stolen from previous victims. Everything she told Dad about her life was designed to make her seem like the perfect solution to his problems. Within weeks, Victoria had moved into our house. She claimed her apartment lease had ended unexpectedly and that she was between homes, while looking for the right property to buy. Dad, who was still struggling with depression and grateful for companionship, offered to let her stay temporarily. That's when Victoria's true nature began to emerge. She wasn't trying to win Dad's love, she was systematically breaking down his resistance to marriage through a campaign of intimidation and psychological manipulation. Victoria would wake Dad up at 3 a.m. with fake emergencies, claiming she'd heard someone trying to break into the house. She'd create chaos during his limited free time, staging arguments with neighbors or having medical emergencies that required his immediate attention. She made it impossible for him to rest or think clearly. She'd also disappear for days at a time without explanation, claiming she was visiting family or handling business matters. But I later learned she was actually conducting surveillance on other potential victims, maintaining multiple manipulation campaigns simultaneously. The most disturbing tactic was Victoria's use of implied threats against Rachel and me. She never directly threatened us, but she'd make comments about how accidents happen to young people, and how families can be torn apart by tragedy. She'd show Dad news articles about car accidents, home invasions, and college campus violence, always with the suggestion that these things could happen to us. She'd position herself as our protector while simultaneously creating the fear that we needed protection from. She'd tell Dad that she noticed suspicious people watching Rachel at school or that she was concerned about David's safety. When I was driving home from college, Victoria had researched our family's trauma from Mom's death and was exploiting Dad's fear of losing more family members. She'd remind him constantly that life is unpredictable, and that families need to stick together during difficult times. The manipulation intensified when Victoria began sabotaging Dad's other relationships. She'd intercept phone calls from his friends, cancel social plans, and create drama whenever he tried to maintain connections outside the house. She was systematically isolating him from his support network. She'd also interfere with his relationship with Rachel and me. She'd tell Dad that we were worried about his judgment, or that we didn't respect his choices. She'd create conflicts between us by spreading lies and misrepresenting conversations. But Victoria's ultimate weapon was financial manipulation. She'd gained access to Dad's bank accounts and was slowly draining his savings while creating fake expenses and emergencies. She'd tell him that their future together required certain investments or that family security meant having cash readily available. She'd also been forging documents that made it appear as if Dad had already made financial commitments to her. She'd show him loan applications, insurance policies, and legal documents that suggested he'd already agreed to various financial arrangements. The pressure campaign reached its peak when Victoria began what she called marriage deadlines. She'd give Dad ultimatums about their relationship, claiming that she couldn't continue living in uncertainty, and that she needed legal commitment to feel secure. But these weren't normal relationship conversations, they were psychological warfare designed to break down Dad's resistance. Victoria would combine emotional manipulation with implied threats, making it clear that refusing to marry her would result in consequences for our entire family. She'd suggest that breaking up would be traumatic for Rachel, and that legal complications might arise from their financial entanglement. She'd imply that Dad's reputation at work could be damaged by personal instability, and that his ability to provide for his family might be questioned. The final manipulation was Victoria's fake pregnancy scare. She claimed to be pregnant and told Dad that the stress of uncertainty was dangerous for the baby. She demanded immediate marriage for the child's security and threatened to leave town if Dad didn't commit. Dad, who was exhausted from months of psychological manipulation and terrified of losing another family member, agreed to marry Victoria in a quick civil ceremony. He was so worn down that he couldn't think clearly about the decision. But Victoria had made a crucial mistake. She'd become so confident in her manipulation that she'd stopped being careful about covering her tracks. She'd left evidence of her surveillance activities, her financial fraud, and her communications with other potential victims. I'd been suspicious of Victoria from the beginning, partly because of my criminal justice background and partly because her behavior reminded me of stalking cases I'd studied. I'd been quietly documenting her activities and had noticed inconsistencies in her stories. The breakthrough came when I found Victoria's surveillance equipment hidden in her car. She'd been recording our conversations, tracking our movements, and maintaining detailed files on our family's activities. She had similar files on at least 6 other families in different states. I contacted the FBI, and they immediately recognized Victoria's methods as part of a larger pattern they'd been investigating. Victoria was part of a network of predators who specialized in targeting vulnerable single parents through stalking and intimidation. The investigation revealed that Victoria had been operating under multiple identities and had successfully forced at least 9 men into marriages over the past 8 years. She'd used surveillance and psychological manipulation to identify targets, then systematically break down their resistance until they agreed to marry her. Once married, she'd drain their assets, gain access to their children, and often disappear before authorities could intervene. In some cases, she'd maintain the marriage long enough to establish legal rights to property and custody, then use those rights to continue exploiting the family. The network Victoria was part of had been sharing information about targets, surveillance techniques, and manipulation strategies. They'd been operating like a criminal organization, with specialized roles and territories. Victoria's arrest led to the discovery of the other cases you've heard about. The stepmothers who terrorized children at night, who used kids as surveillance tools, and who conducted illegal medical experiments were all part of the same network. They'd been sharing victims, techniques, and resources across multiple states. The connection was a private online forum where these predators shared success stories and traded information about targets. They'd been treating the abuse of families like a business, with Victoria specializing in the financial and legal aspects of forced marriages. Victoria was sentenced to 30 years in prison for charges including stalking, fraud, extortion, and conspiracy. The investigation led to arrests of 12 other predators who'd been operating similar schemes across the country. The case revealed how sophisticated these predators had become, using technology and psychological manipulation to target vulnerable families. They'd been exploiting the isolation and trauma of single parents, using their desperation for companionship and stability as weapons against them. Dad required extensive therapy to recover from the psychological manipulation he'd endured. He'd been systematically conditioned to believe that resistance to Victoria's demands would result in harm to his family, making it almost impossible for him to think clearly about the relationship. Rachel struggled with trust issues for years after discovering that someone had been watching our family and planning to exploit us. She'd been particularly affected by learning that Victoria had been documenting her school activities and social relationships. The network's exposure led to new legislation about stalking and predatory marriage fraud. There are now better systems for tracking individuals who use multiple identities to target vulnerable families, and law enforcement has been trained to recognize the signs of systematic manipulation. What I want people to understand is that these predators operate like organized criminals, using sophisticated techniques to identify and exploit vulnerable families. They're not random abusers, they're professionals who share information and resources to maximize their success. The warning signs include adults who seem to appear repeatedly in your life, who know too much about your routines, and who create pressure for rapid relationship progression. If someone seems too perfect or too available during a vulnerable time, that could be a red flag. Victoria and her network had been operating for years because they understood how to exploit the legal system, the social services system, and the psychological vulnerabilities of their targets. They'd been treating the abuse of families like a business model. The stepmother who stalked us into submission is still in prison, but I know there are other networks operating similar schemes. They target families during vulnerable times and use our natural desire for security and companionship against us. If you're a single parent, be cautious about anyone who seems too good to be true or who pushes for rapid relationship progression. Trust your instincts if something feels wrong, and don't be afraid to investigate someone's background before making major commitments. The person who's supposed to love you should never force you into that love through fear and manipulation. Thanks so much for watching. I can't express enough how much your support means. The likes, the comments, it all really helps the channel grow. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. I always take the time to read them. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on any new videos. See you next time.